Hello, world. This is part 7 of creating our podcast monitoring app. So last time we finished up the metadata class as well as the unit testing for it. And we're going to do something very similar today, so we'll just go over it real quick. Basically, it's essentially a dictionary. It holds onto a dictionary that it self-validates, and you can access the elements in the class the same way you would access them in the dictionary using the brackets here. Basically, the validate just ensures that all the elements are the right type, so it's just a dictionary. But instead of taking a dictionary and running it through another file that just validates it's correct as like a helper script, the helper script is just kind of built in to the class itself. And so basically for this one, it just validates that it has a name, it has a URL, that URL is a string, otherwise it raises a type error, and that the URL is basically a valid HTTPS, just in the sense that it has this in front of it, otherwise it raises a value error. Also validates that it has a type, and if that type is not a main or is not the string main or the string sub, it raises a value error here. And so in the test suite, we have a basic example of what the metadata kind of looks like. We have this method here, which is a helper method to verify that the exception is raised. So given an exception type, for example, key error, it will try to create the metadata using the metadata that is for that test, and then it will assert that the exception was called. So if no exception, so the exception was called. So if an exception was called, it'll pass. If no exception was called, then it'll throw an assert error here, and that'll fail the test. So the tests we have a create that verifies that this is proper. We have one that will create it and then try to change the name and verify that this copy in here is working. And then we have tests that basically validate that all the errors are raised. Key errors if it's missing one of these, type error for if the URL is in a string, and then value errors for issues with the value of the URL of the type. So that last time was what we finished off on. So that was this task here, create validated dictionary class for metadata. So we're still working on this deliverable, create the data classes. We have two more, create the validated dictionary class for episodes, and then create the bundle class for feed. So we come down to our little diagram here. We created this metadata here, and then we're creating this episode, and we're going to create this feed. We should see if we can get to both of these today. So let's start at the virtual. Let's get started and start up the virtual environment here. And just check out the log real quick. So let's see what we have. So last time we already had the unit test and some stuff created. So we added all of the UTs, then we updated the class to get them all to pass, and then we did some cleanup here. So we're going to do something fairly similar. So since it's going to be very similar, we're going to start actually kind of do almost some kind of copy paste. Maybe actually, we can always retype it. That's fine. So we want to create a episode. Class file as well as the episode unit test file. And we'll just add in the kind of the skeleton of this. So we have a class episode, init, takes data. What's the method? Item, is it? Get item. So we want to update this kind of get item here. So get item. Biggest item. And then we have a validate. All right, great. So we have those, and now similarly we have the episode unit test. And so let's just take all this, copy it over here and paste it, because it's going to be very similar. We will remove all this. So add a kind of a stub for that, and then remove this. And then we'll need to rename this here to episode. And this is going to be episode and episode. Right. So that actually probably should pass with all this kind of stubbed out stuff. So let's just run this real quick and verify that it passes. Episode test. Great. All right. So we have these two files here, if I can spell status correctly. So we'll git add and git commit, added skeleton for episode and it's UT. No apostrophe. All right, great. So now I'm going to move these over here. So, no, yeah, let's move this over here. So now basically it's move this over. This unit test here. All right, so basically we're going to do kind of something very similar to this. So we can probably kind of just copy these sort of unit tests. The main thing we need to figure out is what is the data that's going to be in here. So just like this, we have a name, URL, and type. For episode, we need to figure out what data is going to be in here so that we can test all of it in this. And so let's say, now, one other thing, by the way, we could do here is if we had wanted to, we don't need to do separate tests. So maybe, I mean, separate test is better because it's going to be clear if there's an error thrown, but I'll kind of show that real quick as I go. So let's do this kind of key error here. And so we'll do the test create, and then we'll do the key error, and we can also do this copy one. So let's figure out what's the data that we actually need. So let's look at the prototype. So just to jot it down real quick. So what do we have? So we have, what did I call it? Just to keep the naming convention the same. So okay, well, so that was just metadata. So this is, I guess we can just call it episode data. Yeah, that's fine. All right, so we have this dictionary here, and so we have these are basically the elements that we kind of have here. So we have a title, we have a description, we have a pub date, we have a duration. That's going to be in seconds, I believe, if I remember correctly. Real quick, let's switch over. Leave for a second, so let's just double check that. So we'll grab the feeds here, and we'll copy this mystery crate. I'll switch over the screens. And what do we have here? So we have this episode, we have a title, description, the duration, 2767. So yeah, that's going to be in seconds. So in this case, just in this case, 2767 divided by 60. So that's 46 minutes and change. And then, so yeah, that should be good there. So we'll switch back. All right, so let's call this one. So we could call it. Oh well, so this, yeah. So we could call it duration. We could call it length. Now it is in seconds, and so that's as a unit. Like most of the others don't really have a unit. This should be date, shouldn't it? Not data. But so similar to how this is pub date, I'm thinking len sec for length in seconds. And then we have the URL. And so in this case, the URL is to the MP3 file. So just not to get like URLs confused, I'm just going to say MP3 because it's really like a link to the MP3. So that's all the data that we're going to basically kind of have in here. And so we can close out the prototype here. Now, this is going to be a string. The description, I'm going to shorten this. So, title string, description of the podcast. Now, publishing date is actually interesting because we could store it. We're going to read it as a string, obviously, but we're going to be parsing it, right? So we have to do the parsing similar to what we did with this prototype. We're going to have to parse this out, and we're going to get the string. So the question is, do I pass the string into this class, or do I pass the and then use it as a string later on, or do I pass an object representation of the string? And so because these classes that I'm creating are kind of like simple data classes, like wrapping the data, and I have to create it specifically for this one, I have to create a parser. I'm not going to have these just be all string types. In fact, this one here I'm going to have be an integer. So let's just say 2767. And this one I'm actually going to have to be a date time. So up in here, I'm going to, from datetime, import datetime as dt, which is, so this is a common way people do it, since datetime is just kind of long. They'll do dt. So the as is basically just anytime I reference dt here, the same way if I reference episode or feed data, feed metadata, I'm referencing this feed metadata. If I said as fmd, right, these are no longer good, but then if I did that, it's the same reference there. So get rid of those changes. Okay, so here I'm going to say dt, and then give it where we're at. We're 2022 month integer is 11, and the day integer is 30. The hour, I wonder if the hour is in, I'm going to assume the hour, since there's no AM, PM, at least is like a given. I'm just going to put 17 for 5 o'clock, and then 32. And what are we on second-wise? 55. That's the exact time it is right now. And then for this MP3, actually, let me real quick go back. So it looks like, if I'm just kind of looking at the data real quick, here, let me switch over. So I'm looking at the data real quick. Basically, it's a link, HTTPS, whatever, / and there's a redirect. There's the MP3. And there's also this kind of updated one, which I don't know that I necessarily care all those details. So at least, come back over, and at least we'll say HTTPS www.fakehost.com / GUID.mp3. So just something arbitrary. All right, and then okay. So now this is valid data, and so now we're going to kind of come in here and do this same sort of test thing. So we're going to turn this into a test create, and we're going to say episode. So we basically just want to be able to create it, so we have to actually add a self up here so we can access it. So basically we're just going to say self.the episode data, and so similar to this one, we're just verifying that we can create it, and in this case this will actually pass because of course no errors are thrown. This one really just kind of comes in when we start adding all the other tests layered on top of it. So we probably want the same sort of thing as this one. We probably want this same sort of copy, and then test key errors. All right. So I'm going to do this one first, and because I'm going to show why that I kind of prefer these over here. So, right, so this other one is I delete, so same thing I did over in this one, self.theEpisode data. I'm going to delete the title. And then I'm going to create an episode. And I'm going to give it this episode data, right? And so, actually, I guess I should do it over on this one because this is already operating. So I'll do that real quick. So let me just run this test to kind of show. So if I'm running Python feed metadata, all right, so all 7 tests pass. So we're going to make the name one fail. So we're going to remove this here. So now no error will be thrown on the name. So now if I run it, I get 1 test failure, right? And that's, I have the test exception on no name, right? So that's the one test that failed, test exception on no name failed. Okay, so now what's the other way that I could test all of these in one test, right? So I could have another one that's test key errors. And then instead what I do is I say for key in, and in this case, well, I guess I could do, so I'm going to say keys equals self.dmetadata.keys, and then create a list out of that. So I have this list of keys, right? So now I'm going to do the same delete here. And then I'm going to say, actually no, so I want to say for key in keys. I just don't want to mess up the keys, even though it'll probably be fine. I want to do a delete, and I want to do delete that self.metadata key. Here. And now I want to run the verify exception raised. Right, which is just this logic up here. So now if I run this, the name one is going to fail. All right, so now I have one failure and one error. Make sure. Dicta keys. For key in keys, type error, hash type, dicta keys. Is that giving me an error on this or this one? It did turn into a list, so I feel like it should. Let me do this. That's the way I should have converted it to a list, that's why. Okay, so there we go. And do that, and do that. All right. So, okay, so now we have both failures, right? So let's look at what the failures kind of come up as. So we have the no name failure, right? And so we have here test exception on no name, and then it shows verify exception raised was assert. And so, verify that the exception key error is raised, otherwise it asserts and it asserted. So no key error exception was raised. This one, wait, we have failure. I feel like okay, there we go. And so now we have the second test here. So this is that first test we just looked at, and then here's the second one. So here we have test key errors. And then so there's no indication basically here of which key it is. So you could then debug it and figure it out, but it obviously is just much more kind of cumbersome to do so. So that's why having the separate test for each makes it very obvious kind of what's missing and what's kind of going on. So let's remove all this. And just run that real quick. Everything passes. So now we're over here, and we have these three tests. So now what we're going to do, so we don't want this. Instead, we want this same sort of thing here. Test exception on no title. I'm going to remove these just real quick and update each of these. Description, pub date, length in seconds, MP3. And then we're going to need this helper method still, so we'll add that over up in here. And instead of creating this feed metadata, we're going to create an episode. And then what other things, so as far as like what we don't want, like what things we kind of want to indicate. So similarly, so the title should be a string. The description should be a string. The publishing date should be a date time. The length should be an int, and the MP3 should be a the MP3 should be a string as well. And then we also can include these kind of value errors here. And so I don't know that we don't necessarily care that the title or description has a value error. The length in seconds should be greater than 0. The MP3 should probably contain the HTTPS. Should probably also contain the .mp3. And then the publishing date realistically should probably just be not in the future. It should be like present or past. And so we basically only care about these three. So we'll add in more tests for those. And instead of, so similarly, we set exception on instead of no, we're going to make this all bad. So let's update these. All right. So now, basically, we're going to do the same thing we did here where we delete each one. And so this is going to be a delete self.episode data. And then this is title. And then we call self.verify. And this should be a key error. So let's basically, we'll just add in these into each one of these here. And then we just want to update each of these with this. And so now we want to add in these for the bad information. So that's going to be similar to this one here, where we do want two more of these because we do want the types for these other ones. So this is going to be bad title, and it's going to be bad description. In these cases, it's going to be similar to these other ones where we're basically just updating self.episode data. And this is going to be title equals, make it a string, and then we're going to self.verify. The exception is raised, and there's going to be a type error. And then keep this one around. Same thing here. Update this to the description. Type error. And then one more time for this, but then we also want a second error here. So let's first update this to pub date. Verify that's all right. All right. Pub date, and this in here, except now, so similar to where we had this value error, this is going to be the right type. It is going to be a date time, but it's going to be, so we're going to say DT not now, but we want it to be in the future. So we're going to add to it a delta, and I think that's a different date time. I think it's an import time delta as TD. And so we're going to add to it a time delta of 1 day. So it'll be 1 day in the future. So that should throw an error. And that should throw a value error. And we'll get rid of this one. And now we'll copy these in place. So it looks like we're going to run, I don't want to run long on time on this. So I'll probably separate the implementation, even though it'll be quick, into another episode. We'll move on from there. So let's finish up this test and then we'll commit the work. So here we want, so we had pub date, we want length second and MP3. And this is MP3. And so length second, that can be some string. And this will be a negative number. and then the MP3 can be an integer, and then this will be. So let's do it without. We want to kind of test both that it doesn't have an HTTPS and it doesn't have an MP3. So the first one we'll do is we'll say bad link www.badlink.com, and then we'll add a second value error. That'll be, instead of having the URL part, it'll be doit.mp3. That should be basically all the errors we want to throw. And the last one is this copy one. And so let's go similar to this. We'll say we'll create a episode. And then we'll have a self.the episode title equals new title string, and then assert and then we'll assert that the episode title is title string. So that's basically all the tests we want to have here. So let me move these all back over. I'm going to get rid of this one. And so now let's run it. And so they should almost all fail. So we had 1 failure and 10 errors. And so we're getting errors essentially from these exceptions, these assertions. So we're getting attribute errors. Episode test has no attribute D metadata. All right, so it looks like there's actually issues. D metadata. Oh, okay, that's why. So we're getting errors from this. So we want this to be episode. And this should be the D episodes. Now it should be failures instead. Yeah, so now we have 11 failures. So we have a lot to fix. It's going to be very simple to fix because it's essentially just filling out this now empty skeleton of a class with the same sort of thing that's in here. And if we do, then we'll verify that essentially all these are correct. So let me add some spaces in. And that looks good. All right. So status, and we'll say broken created all episode UTs. Let's look at the log and let's tag this episode 7, right? Yeah. Great. So now, next time we're going to come in and we're going to fill in this episode class as we did for this, get all the tests to pass. So, like most things in software, didn't get as much done as you expect to do in the time, but that's basically the life. So next time we will actually get to some implementation and then continue on with the rest of the data classes, and then start moving on to the parser and adding in that logic, and then we'll have a lot of that diagram kind of filled in with things. So till next time, see you.